The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Harrison's training grounds as Sergeant Sarah Blackwood adjusted her tactical vest and checked her sidearm one last time. The familiar weight of the Beretta M9 against her hip provided a small comfort, a reminder of the operator she once was before a mission gone wrong had relegated her to a desk job. Today marked her first return to the training compound in 5 years, and the knot in her stomach tightened as she approached the main building. The sound of gunfire echoed in the distance from the shooting ranges where elite soldiers honed their skills. Fort Harrison, Texas, stood as the crown jewel of special operations training, where America's finest warriors were forged through rigorous combat simulation and tactical instruction. The facility's reputation was legendary among military circles, producing operators who served in the most dangerous corners of the world. Sarah paused briefly, touching the silver star pinned discreetly inside her uniform pocket. The memories flooded back, unbidden. Afghanistan 2011. The mission that had earned her the medal and simultaneously ended her field career. The distinctive crack of AK-47s, the metallic taste of fear, the warm, sticky feeling of blood soaking through her uniform. Her blood and others. A voice broke through her reverie. "You planning on standing there all day, Sergeant?" Sarah turned to see Colonel Frank Hammond watching her from the entrance to the administrative building. At 72, Hammond remained an imposing figure despite his age. His weathered face bore the lines of decades of service, from Cold War operations in Berlin to advisory roles in both Iraq wars. His eyes, sharp as ever, assessed her with a mixture of warmth and concern. "Sorry, sir, just taking it in." Hammond nodded, understanding more than she expressed. He had been the one to summon her here, pulling strings to secure her temporary assignment from intelligence analysis to the training facility. What he hadn't explained was why. Inside his office, Hammond closed the door and engaged the privacy lock. The space reflected its occupant, organized utilitarian, with mementos from a distinguished career carefully arranged on shelves. A faded photograph showed a younger Hammond standing beside a tall man in army fatigues, whom Sarah recognized immediately. Her father, James Blackwood, killed in action in Iraq in 2007. "You look just like him," Hammond said, following her gaze to the photograph. Same determined expression. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, though the comparison to her father always stirred complicated emotions. "Thank you for bringing me here, Colonel, but I'm still not clear on my assignment." The paperwork was deliberately vague. Hammond's expression darkened as he settled into his chair. "Because what I'm about to tell you isn't official." "Not yet." He pushed a folder across the desk. 3 operators from Echo Team died in the past 6 months. Separate incidents, all during high-risk operations. Sarah opened the file, scanning the incident reports with the trained eye of an intelligence analyst. "These look like standard mission casualties, sir." "That's what we're meant to think." Hammond leaned forward. All 3 died executing the same tactical maneuver, a weapon disarmament technique that failed catastrophically in the field. Sarah studied the photographs, noting the similar patterns of injuries. "You suspect sabotage." "I suspect someone is deliberately teaching flawed techniques that work perfectly in controlled environments, but fail spectacularly in actual combat situations." Hammond's voice dropped lower. "We're training our best soldiers to die, Sergeant." Sarah closed the file, her analytical mind already piecing together implications. "Why bring this to me? I've been behind a desk for 5 years." Hammond smiled thinly. "Because before that desk, you were one of the best close-quarters combat specialists Delta Force ever produced. Because your injury gave everyone the convenient fiction that you're no longer dangerous. And because I trust you completely." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "Your father saved my life in Berlin during Operation Midnight Ghost back in '85. Now I'm asking his daughter to help save the lives of our operators." Sarah straightened. "What's my cover?" "Safety Assessment Specialist. You'll observe training, evaluate protocols, identify risks." Hammond's expression hardened. "But your real mission is to find out who's corrupting our training program and why." He reached into his desk drawer and withdrew an antique M1911A1 pistol, sliding it across to her. The weapon was immaculately maintained, its worn grip telling stories of past service. "This was my sidearm during Cold War operations. Berlin, 1985. Carried it through some of the darkest days behind enemy lines." Hammond's eyes locked with hers. "I have a feeling you might need it." Sarah accepted the weapon with appropriate reverence, recognizing both the gift and the implied gravity of her assignment. Who should I be watching? Hammond opened another file containing personnel photographs. Lieutenant Colonel Jason Morgan runs the training program. West Point graduate, 2 tours in Iraq, highly decorated. By all accounts, he's beyond reproach, but his position gives him complete control over training protocols. He indicated another photograph. Captain Robert Chandler, former Navy SEAL, transferred to Army Special Operations training 3 years ago. Stellar combat record, but there have been complaints about his training methods and his attitude toward female personnel. Old school believes women have no place in combat roles. Yes, Sarah had encountered that mentality throughout her career. It hadn't stopped her then, it wouldn't stop her now. Master Sergeant Diego Martinez, weapons specialist, 20 years of experience, served in Afghanistan and Iraq, runs the advanced weapons training courses. No red flags, but he works closely with Chandler. Sarah committed the faces to memory. Timeline: you have 2 weeks. After that, a new group of operators begins advanced training with potentially compromised techniques. Hammond's expression grew somber. More body bags if we don't fix this. The weight of responsibility settled firmly on Sarah's shoulders. I'll find them, sir. One more thing. Hammond stood moving to the window that overlooked the training compound. Trust no one completely. If someone is selling our operators to the enemy, they'll be watching for threats. Maintain your cover at all costs. Sarah nodded, understanding the dangerous game she was about to play. When do I start? Now. The main training facility buzzed with activity as Sarah followed the administrative assistant through corridors lined with photographs of graduating special operations classes. The rhythmic sounds of hand-to-hand combat emanated from a large room to their left, while instructors barked orders in another. Every face they passed registered momentary curiosity at her presence before returning to their tasks. Lieutenant Colonel Morgan met them outside the combat simulation area. In his early 50s, he maintained the physical condition of a man 20 years younger, his posture ramrod straight as he extended a hand. Sergeant Blackwood, welcome to Fort Harrison. His grip was firm, professional. Colonel Hammond explained your assignment. Safety assessment isn't usually our priority, but after recent events, headquarters is concerned. Sarah matched his professionalism. Recent events, sir. I'm sure you've been briefed. Morgan's expression revealed nothing. We'll provide complete access to training facilities and records. Your report goes directly to Hammond. I understand. Yes, sir. Standard procedure for external assessment. Morgan nodded, though something flickered briefly across his features. Annoyance, concern. Martinez will show you the weapons training areas this afternoon. For now, I thought you might observe close quarters combat instruction. He led her into a large open space where 24 soldiers were paired off practicing grappling techniques. The instructor, Captain Robert Chandler, moved between them, correcting positions and demonstrating holds. He was younger than Morgan, perhaps late 30s, with the compact, muscular build common to special operators. His movements displayed the fluid economy of motion that came from years of combat experience. Captain, Morgan called, our safety assessment specialist has arrived, Sergeant Sarah Blackwood. Chandler paused, surveying Sarah with undisguised skepticism. His gaze lingered on her insignia, then traveled to her face. The dismissal in his eyes was instantaneous. A desk jockey here to tell us how to train operators. His tone bordered on insubordination. No offense, Sergeant, but have you ever seen actual combat? Before Sarah could respond, Morgan intervened. Captain Chandler, Sergeant Blackwood comes highly recommended by Colonel Hammond. She'll observe today's session. Chandler's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. As ordered, sir. He turned back to his class, deliberately shutting her out. Pair up for disarmament drills. Simulate hostile with pistol at close range. Sarah found a position against the wall where she could observe without interrupting. She watched with practiced eyes as the operators formed pairs, one playing the aggressor with a training pistol, while the other executed disarmament techniques. Something about the methodology immediately caught her attention. The technique being taught contained elements she recognized from Soviet Sistema, a combat system developed for KGB operatives during the Cold War. American forces shouldn't have had access to those techniques until after the Soviet collapse. Yet here they were incorporated into the training regimen with subtle but critical modifications. She noted how the trainees were being instructed to shift their weight during the disarmament sequence. A slight deviation from proper technique that would work perfectly in a controlled environment, but could prove fatal against an experienced opponent. The kind of modification that would only be apparent to someone who understood the original system. One trainee was struggling with the sequence, his movements hesitant as he attempted to disarm his partner. Chandler noticed and moved toward them. "Henderson, you're overthinking it." The captain demonstrated the move again, his motions smooth and practiced. "Weight forward, rotate through the center line, control the weapon." Simple. Sarah saw the problem immediately. The weight distribution Chandler demonstrated would leave the operator vulnerable to a counterattack for approximately 1.5 seconds. In combat, those seconds meant death. She remained silent, gathering observations and mentally documenting discrepancies between standard protocols and what she witnessed. After 40 minutes, the class shifted to another exercise, practicing responses to knife threats. Again, she noted subtle modifications to established techniques, changes that created exploitable weaknesses. When the session ended, the operators filed out for their next training and rotation, leaving Sarah alone with Chandler as he recorded notes on a tablet. He seemed determined to ignore her presence until she cleared her throat. "Captain, I noticed some interesting modifications to standard disarmament techniques." Chandler looked up, his expression guarded. "These aren't standard techniques. They're advanced combat methods for elite operators. The weight distribution on the pistol disarmament leaves the defender exposed through the center line for nearly 2 seconds." His eyes narrowed. "That's an intentional trade-off for faster weapon acquisition. Sometimes you sacrifice temporary safety for speed. In my experience, proper technique achieves both." Sarah kept her tone neutral, professional. "The original methodology maintains protection of the center line throughout the sequence." Chandler set down his tablet, turning to face her fully. "Your experience?" Skepticism dripped from every word. "What exactly is your experience with close quarters combat, Sergeant?" Sarah maintained her cover story. "I've studied combat methodologies extensively during my safety assessments." "Studied?" He almost laughed. "There's a difference between studying and doing, Sergeant. These men will face real threats with real consequences. They don't have the luxury of theoretical knowledge." The dismissal was clear, but Sarah pressed on. "The knife defense technique you demonstrated places pressure on the radial nerve, but misses the brachial plexus control point. That modification reduces effectiveness by approximately 40%. Chandler's expression shifted from dismissal to irritation. "Those techniques are classified. Who exactly are you, Sergeant?" "Someone concerned about operator safety." She met his gaze steadily. "When techniques fail in the field, people die." Something dangerous flickered across his features. "Are you suggesting my training is getting people killed?" "I'm suggesting that deviations from proven methodologies should be thoroughly tested before implementation." Sarah nodded toward the training area. "I'd like to review the complete curriculum and testing data for these modified techniques." "That's restricted information." Chandler stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. "Available only to certified combat instructors. Colonel Hammond has authorized complete access for my assessment." Sarah didn't back away. "I'll need those files by tomorrow morning." Their standoff was interrupted by the arrival of Master Sergeant Martinez. Shorter than Chandler, but similarly built, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a veteran operator. His expression revealed nothing as he assessed the tension between them. "Captain, the range is prepped for the afternoon qualification." His eyes shifted to Sarah. "Sergeant Blackwood, Colonel Morgan asked me to show you the weapons facilities." Chandler held her gaze for a moment longer before stepping back. "We'll continue this discussion later, Sergeant. I look forward to reading your assessment." The threat underlying his professional tone was unmistakable. As Sarah followed Martinez toward the shooting ranges, she felt Chandler's eyes tracking her movement. She had made an enemy, but more importantly, she had identified her first lead. The modified techniques matched precisely with the failed maneuvers that had resulted in operator deaths. Martinez maintained professional silence until they were outside. "Word of advice, Sergeant. Captain Chandler doesn't respond well to criticism, especially from outsiders." "I noticed." Sarah studied Martinez, trying to gauge whether he might be an ally or another threat. "Are you comfortable with the modifications to standard CQC techniques?" Martinez glanced at her, measuring his response. "I specialize in weapons training, not hand-to-hand, but around here, questioning methodology isn't encouraged." He pushed open the door to the indoor range, especially for administrative personnel. The shooting range stretched before them 20 lanes with advanced target systems. Several operators were conducting qualification drills. With M4A1 carbines, their controlled bursts striking center mass with mechanical precision. Martinez led her to the control room overlooking the range. All firearms training is conducted under strict safety protocols. Weapons are checked in and out through secured armory stations. Live ammunition is accounted for down to the individual round. He pointed to computer stations along one wall, digital tracking of all range activities, shooter performance, and ammunition expenditure. Sarah nodded, taking in the details while searching for potential security gaps. Who has authorization to modify training protocols? Martinez stiffened slightly. Lieutenant Colonel Morgan approves all changes, but Captain Chandler develops most of the close quarters combat curriculum. Why, just establishing the chain of responsibility. Sarah moved toward the window overlooking the range. What about scenario training, live-fire exercises? Conducted 3 times weekly under Chandler's supervision. Martinez pointed to a separate facility visible through the windows. The kill house, reconfigurable interior multiple entry points, advanced target systems. We run everything from hostage rescue to room clearing. With live ammunition, for advanced training, yes, under strict safety controls. Sarah watched the operators on the range, each movement disciplined and precise. Has anyone questioned Chandler's methodology, the modifications he's implementing? Martinez's expression remained carefully neutral. Like I said, questioning isn't encouraged. He paused, then added quietly, but you're not the first to notice discrepancies. This caught Sarah's attention. Who else? Sergeant Michael Harris, one of our top trainees. He served under your father in Iraq. Martinez watched her reaction carefully. He mentioned concerns about some of the new techniques after his teammate was injured during training last month. Sarah kept her expression neutral despite the surprise. Her father had been dead for 18 years. Someone who had served with him would recognize her background wasn't simply administrative. Where can I find Sergeant Harris? Lane 12, the one out shooting everyone else. Sarah turned her attention to the indicated lane. A tall operator was systematically engaging targets with remarkable precision. Even at this distance, she could see the tight grouping of his shots. Thank you, Master Sergeant. I appreciate the tour and the information. Martinez nodded. One more thing, Sergeant Blackwood. He lowered his voice. Whatever you're really doing here, be careful. People who ask questions sometimes find trouble. Before she could respond, he walked away, leaving Sarah to wonder whether his warning was a threat or genuine concern. She made a mental note to investigate Martinez more thoroughly while focusing her immediate attention on Harris. If he had recognized issues with the training and served with her father, he might prove to be a valuable ally. The afternoon progressed with tours of additional facilities. Sarah meticulously documented everything from range procedures to equipment maintenance records. By the time the sun began to set, she had compiled extensive notes and identified several areas for deeper investigation. More importantly, she had confirmed her initial suspicion someone was deliberately introducing flaws into critical combat techniques. After the final training rotation concluded, Sarah made her way to the administrative building where she had been assigned temporary office space. The small room contained a desk computer terminal and secure filing cabinet. She locked the door before removing the antique M1911A1 from her bag and placing it in the drawer. Hammond's gift represented more than a weapon. It was a tangible connection to the covert Cold War operations that suddenly seemed relevant to present dangers. She was reviewing facility schematics when a knock interrupted her concentration. Opening the door, she found herself face-to-face with Sergeant Michael Harris. Up close, he appeared younger than expected, perhaps mid-30s, with the intense focus common to special operators. Sergeant Blackwood, Master Sergeant Martinez mentioned you wanted to speak with me. Sarah ushered him inside, closing the door. Thank you for coming, Sergeant Harris. Harris remained standing, his posture formal. Martinez said you're conducting a safety assessment. Is this about Tyler's accident during CQC training? Potentially, Sarah gestured to the chair across from her desk. Please have a seat. I'd like to hear more about that incident. Harris sat his movements economical. It happened during advanced disarmament training. Tyler executed the technique exactly as instructed, but something went wrong. The training weapon discharge simulation round hit him in the throat. Could have been fatal if we hadn't had a medic present. Was Captain Chandler instructing? Harris nodded. He called it a failure to execute properly, but Tyler had performed the same maneuver successfully dozens of times before. Something changed in the methodology. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Martinez mentioned you served with my father. Harris's expression softened. Colonel Blackwood was my first commander in Iraq. Best officer I ever served under. His eyes studied her face. You have his eyes, and I'm guessing more than just his eyes. What makes you say that? Because the daughter of James Blackwood wouldn't be sent here for a routine safety assessment. Harris lowered his voice. 3 operators dead in 6 months, all using techniques recently modified by Chandler. That's not coincidence. Sarah made a quick decision. What I'm about to tell you remains between us. Understood. Completely. You're right. I'm investigating potential sabotage of training protocols. She watched his reaction carefully. Someone is deliberately introducing flaws that lead to operator deaths in the field. Harris showed no surprise, only grim confirmation. I suspected as much after Tyler's accident. The new techniques work perfectly in controlled environments, but create fatal vulnerabilities in actual combat situations. Have you raised these concerns officially? Tried to. My report was buried. Harris shifted forward. 2 days later, I was removed from the instructor track and placed under Chandler's direct supervision. Message received. Sarah processed this information. Do you have access to the training records, documentation of the modifications? Limited access. Chandler keeps most of it on secured systems. Harris hesitated. But I did manage to preserve copies of the original techniques from before the modifications began, for comparison. This was exactly what Sarah needed. Can you get those to me? Already brought them. Harris produced a small drive from his pocket. Everything I could gather safely, including the original Soviet Sistema manual that some of these techniques seem based on. Sarah accepted the drive, impressed by his initiative. How did you recognize the Sistema elements? Joint operation with Russian Special Forces 2015, before relations deteriorated. Harris smiled slightly. Plus, your father taught me to study every combat methodology I could find. Knowledge keeps you alive. The mention of her father's teaching methods confirmed Harris's connection. James Blackwood had been known for his encyclopedic knowledge of combat techniques from around the world. Thank you, Sergeant. This is extremely helpful. Harris stood, his expression serious again. Whatever's happening, it goes beyond Chandler. He's implementing the changes, but someone higher is authorizing them. Morgenstein, possibly, or someone using him. Harris moved toward the door. Watch yourself, Sergeant. If they realize what you're investigating, they won't hesitate to eliminate the threat. After Harris departed, Sarah secured the drive in her pocket and continued her work with renewed focus. The pieces were beginning to align. Modified Soviet combat techniques. Operator deaths in the field. Resistance to questioning. Someone at Fort Harrison was deliberately sabotaging America's elite fighters. As darkness fell over the facility, Sarah completed her initial assessment and prepared to meet Hammond at the arranged location off base. She carefully checked her surroundings before leaving the administrative building, where that her questions today might have already drawn unwanted attention. At precisely 2100 hours, Sarah entered the small roadhouse 5 miles from Fort Harrison. The establishment catered to military personnel, its walls decorated with unit patches and memorabilia from America's conflicts. Hammond sat alone in a corner booth, civilian clothes, making him almost unrecognizable to those unfamiliar with him. Sarah slid into the seat across from him, placing her folder on the table. Productive first day. Sarah nodded, keeping her voice low. I've identified discrepancies in the close quarters combat curriculum. Subtle modifications to establish techniques that create exploitable vulnerabilities. Hammond's expression remained neutral, though his eyes reflected concern. Chandler? Definitely involved. Defensive when questioned. The modified techniques match exactly with the failed maneuvers that resulted in the Echo Team casualties. Sarah glanced around before continuing. I've also made contact with Sergeant Harris. He provided documentation of the changes over time. Harris is reliable. His loyalty to your father extends to you. Hammond took a sip from his glass. What about Morgan? Unclear. He authorized the modifications, but whether knowingly or through manipulation remains to be determined. Hammond considered this. Your father and I encountered something similar during Operation Midnight Ghost. Berlin, 1985. Sarah leaned forward slightly. You never told me exactly what that operation involved. Officially, it never happened. Hammond's eyes grew distant with memory. Your father and I led a small team into East Berlin to extract a Soviet defector. What we found instead was a KGB training facility where they were developing combat techniques specifically designed to counter American Special Operations methodology. Systema, Hammond's eyebrows raised slightly. You recognized it. Elements of it have been incorporated into Chandler's modified techniques, specifically elements that would only be effective against opponents trained in American methodologies. Hammond nodded slowly. During the Cold War, the Soviets invested heavily in studying how to defeat American combat techniques. They created counters to every move, every strategy we employed. Operation Midnight Ghost was intended to steal those counters so we could develop our own counters. I'm guessing it worked. Your father was the one who got us out alive, along with the Soviet manuals. Hammond's expression darkened. But we had a breach. Someone codenamed Frost sold information to the Soviets. We lost 2 operators before we identified the leak. Sarah processed the implications. You think whoever is behind the current modifications has access to those Soviet counters? I think someone is reviving an old playbook whether they know it or not. Hammond slid a small notepad across the table. Project Icarus. Look for any reference to it in their systems. What is it? A program developed after Midnight Ghost to incorporate certain Soviet techniques into our own training. It was shut down in 1988 when we realized some of the techniques created more vulnerabilities than advantages. Hammond's voice dropped lower. The program documents were classified and allegedly destroyed. Sarah committed the name to memory. I'll need access to the secure training databases. Already arranged. Your credentials will clear you for all but the highest security levels. For those, you'll need to find another way in. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several soldiers from Fort Harrison. Sarah recognized them from the afternoon training session. Hammond smoothly shifted topics, discussing routine administrative matters until the soldiers settled at the bar out of earshot. Tomorrow they're running live fire exercises in the kill house, Sarah said once it was safe to continue. It would be the perfect opportunity to observe Chandler's teaching methodology in action. Hammond nodded. Proceed, but maintain your cover. Push too hard, and you'll alert whoever's behind this. As they prepared to leave separately, Hammond placed a hand on her arm. Your father would be proud of what you're doing. Sarah allowed herself a brief smile. He taught me that the most dangerous weapon is the one you never see coming. Then make sure they don't see you coming, Sarah. Hammond's expression grew serious. Because if they do, you'll face something far more dangerous than modified training techniques. The following morning dawned clear and cool as Sarah arrived at the training facility earlier than required. She wanted time to explore without the watchful eyes of Chandler or Morgan tracking her movements. The administrative building was nearly empty, providing the perfect opportunity to access the secure training databases Hammond had mentioned. Her credentials granted her entry to the digital archives where training protocols were stored. She quickly located the current close-quarters combat curriculum and began comparing it with the historical versions Harris had provided. The changes were subtle but unmistakable. Over the past 8 months, critical elements of proven techniques had been systematically modified in ways that created exploitable vulnerabilities. More concerning was what she found buried in a subfolder labeled Historical Reference. A single document titled Project I Methodology Review contained direct references to the Soviet counter techniques Hammond had described. The document was heavily redacted, but what remained clearly connected to the modified training protocols Chandler was implementing. Sarah was documenting these findings when movement in the hallway alerted her to someone approaching. She quickly closed the files and switched to routine safety assessment forms as the door opened. Captain Chandler stood in the door frame, his expression hard. Early start, Sergeant. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor. Just reviewing yesterday's observations before today's exercises. Chandler entered, closing the door behind him. I've been looking into your background, Sergeant Blackwood. Your records show administrative duties for the past 5 years, yet you speak with remarkable authority about advanced combat techniques. Safety assessment requires comprehensive knowledge of proper methodology. Safety assessment, he almost laughed. Is that what Hammond told Morgan? Because your access permissions look more like counterintelligence than safety. Sarah recognized the dangerous territory. Chandler was fishing for confirmation of her true purpose. My security clearance reflects the sensitive nature of special operations training evaluation. Chandler moved closer, his physical presence deliberately intimidating. Let me be clear, Sergeant. This facility operates under my training protocols. Protocols that have been vetted and approved at the highest levels. Whatever game you and Hammond are playing ends now. Is that a threat, Captain Mom? It's professional courtesy. His eyes hardened. Today's live fire exercise is complex and dangerous. It requires complete focus from all participants. Having an administrative observer questioning methodologies creates unnecessary risk. Then perhaps I should participate rather than observe. Sarah held his gaze steadily, to fully understand the safety implications. Chandler's surprise quickly transformed into something more calculating. You want to participate in advanced CQC training against experienced operators. If that's what it takes to complete my assessment properly. A slow smile spread across Chandler's face, not reaching his eyes. Very well, Sergeant. Report to the equipment room at 0900. We'll see exactly how your theoretical knowledge translates to practical application. After he left, Sarah released a measured breath. She had just accelerated her timeline dramatically, potentially exposing herself. But she had also created an opportunity to directly test Chandler's modified techniques and potentially force him to reveal more than he intended. She secured her findings, sent an encrypted message to Hammond, updating him on the situation, and prepared for what would undoubtedly be a challenging test of her capabilities. If Chandler wanted to see what she was capable of, he was about to get a demonstration that would shatter his assumptions completely. User works at YouTube, publishing user's job title or role. Content creator. User's location. United States user lives with non-user's education level. BS user's email address. None user's favorite topics. Military thriller. I'll continue with part 2 of 45 seconds to disarm the secret at Fort Harrison. Following the outline structure and maintaining the cinematic prose style for male viewers over 60. Sarah entered the equipment room precisely at 0900 hours, finding it already occupied by a dozen operators preparing for the day's exercise. Conversations quieted as she walked in curious glances, following her movement across the room. At the far end, Master Sergeant Martinez was distributing tactical gear while checking names off a digital roster. His eyebrows rose slightly upon seeing her. Sergeant Blackwood, I wasn't aware you'd be joining us today. Last-minute addition, Sarah replied, maintaining a professional tone. Captain Chandler approved my participation for a more comprehensive safety assessment. Martinez studied her for a moment, something unreadable flickering across his features. I see. He consulted his tablet. You'll need full tactical gear. Second locker room to the right. Sarah nodded her thanks and moved toward the indicated door. Behind her, whispered conversations resumed speculation about her presence spreading among the operators. She caught fragments as she passed. Safety assessment, my ass. That's not why she's here. $5 says Chandler's setting her up to fail. You see how she moves. That's not admin personnel. The female locker room was empty when she entered. Sarah quickly changed into the provided tactical gear, the familiar weight of the equipment bringing back muscle memories from her days in the field. The gear was top-quality ballistic vest, tactical pants with reinforced knees, combat boots, and communications headset. She adjusted everything with practiced efficiency, her body remembering precisely how each piece should fit. A knock on the door interrupted her preparations. Sergeant, you've got 5 minutes. Martinez's voice carried through the door. Copy that. Sarah completed her preparations and rejoined the group as they gathered for briefing. Captain Chandler stood at the front of the room beside a digital display showing a building schematic. His eyes found her immediately, a calculating smile touching his lips briefly before he addressed the assembled operators. Today's exercise simulates a high-risk extraction under hostile conditions. The objective is to clear the structure, secure the asset, and reach extraction point within the designated time frame. Chandler gestured to the schematic. The kill house has been configured with multiple hostile elements in a single non-combatant target. Standard rules of engagement apply. He tapped the display, highlighting specific areas. Entry points here, here, and here. Asset location is unknown and must be determined during the operation. Communication will be maintained via secure tactical frequency. Sarah studied the layout, identifying potential choke points and ambush locations. The structure was designed to challenge even experienced operators with limited visibility, multiple levels, and restricted movement corridors. You'll operate in four-person teams, Chandler continued. Team assignments are on your tactical tablets. Sarah checked her issued device, noting she'd been assigned to Team 3 with Sergeant Harris and two operators she hadn't yet met, Specialists Wilson and Rodriguez. The team designations weren't random. Chandler had deliberately placed her with Harris, perhaps suspecting their communication. One more thing. Chandler's gaze fixed directly on Sarah. Today we'll be implementing the Advanced Disarmament Protocol in close quarters. Sergeant Blackwood has expressed interest in these techniques, so Team 3 will demonstrate their practical application. The subtle emphasis on practical wasn't lost on Sarah or the other operators. Chandler was orchestrating a direct challenge to her capabilities, using the exercise to test her combat skills while potentially exposing her true purpose. As the teams dispersed to collect their weapons and final equipment, Harris approached her. Heads up, Chandler stacked the course with specific scenarios targeted at testing disarmament techniques. He's setting you up. Sarah checked her training weapon, a modified Glock 17 loaded with simulation rounds. I figured as much. Wilson and Rodriguez are solid operators. They'll follow your lead if you demonstrate competence. Harris lowered his voice. But watch your back. Chandler will be monitoring everything through the facility cameras. Lieutenant Colonel Morgan entered the preparation area, his expression betraying mild surprise at seeing Sarah in tactical gear. He moved directly to Chandler, and though Sarah couldn't hear their conversation, Morgan's questioning gestures and Chandler's dismissive responses suggested disagreement about her participation. Martinez approached carrying additional equipment. Comms check for Team 3, channel secured. He handed Sarah an earpiece. Command has override capabilities if the exercise needs to be terminated. His eyes met hers briefly, conveying an unspoken warning. Safety first, Sergeant. The teams completed their preparations and moved toward the kill house staging area. The structure stood apart from the main training facilities, a two-story concrete building with reconfigurable interior walls and advanced monitoring systems. From the outside, it resembled an unassuming warehouse, but inside lay one of the most sophisticated combat simulation environments in the military. Team 1 entered first, disappearing through the main entrance, while the remaining teams waited at their designated insertion points. Sarah used the time to observe Wilson and Rodriguez, both younger operators, with the focused demeanor of experienced fighters despite their relatively junior rank. Sergeant Blackwood, Rodriguez nodded respectfully. Word is you're more than a safety inspector. Everything's relevant to the assessment, Sarah replied neutrally. Wilson grinned. Harris says you know your stuff. That true? Before Sarah could respond, Harris interjected. Focus on the mission. We're up in 3 minutes. Team 2 received their signal and moved into position at the east entrance. Sarah and her team would enter from the north side, creating a pincer movement through the structure. As they took their positions, Chandler's voice came through their communication devices. Team 3, your insertion begins in 60 seconds. Primary objective is second floor east wing. Be advised, heavy resistance expected in stairwell approach. Sarah recognized the deliberate setup. The stairwell created a natural choke point where close quarters confrontation would be unavoidable. Exactly the scenario where the flawed disarmament techniques would be tested. Suggestions, Harris asked quietly, deferring to her despite his greater familiarity with the facility. Sarah studied the building's exterior. Standard stack formation until the first junction. Then split into 2 elements. Harris and I will take point toward the stairwell. Wilson and Rodriguez provide rear security and watch for flanking elements. The other operators nodded, recognizing the sound tactical approach. Whatever doubts they might have had about her qualifications were temporarily suspended in favor of mission focus. 30 seconds. Sarah positioned herself second in the stack with Harris on point. The familiar surge of adrenaline sharpened her senses as years of training and battlefield experience pushed administrative cover aside, revealing the operator beneath. Team 3, execute. Harris breached into the entrance with practiced efficiency. Sarah followed immediately, the weapon at the ready, as they entered the dimly lit structure. The interior had been configured as an office complex with narrow hallways and multiple rooms. Red emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across their path, simulating compromised infrastructure. They moved silently through the first corridor, clearing rooms methodically. The facility's sound system created ambient battlefield noise, distant gunfire, occasional explosions, and indistinct radio chatter, adding to the sensory challenge. Sarah maintained precise distance from Harris, her movements fluid and economical. At the first junction, they executed the planned split without verbal communication, using hand signals to coordinate their approach. Sarah and Harris advanced toward the stairwell, while Wilson and Rodriguez secured their rear. "Contact front," Harris whispered into the comm as a shadow moved ahead. Two hostile targets emerged from adjoining rooms, training weapons raised. Harris engaged the first with controlled precision. Sarah simultaneously identified the second target, acquiring Harris from an oblique angle. She pivoted smoothly, firing two simulation rounds that struck center mass. The target's vest registered the hits, activating red indicator lights signifying a neutralized threat. "Clear," Sarah confirmed, her voice steady. They continued toward the stairwell, encountering sporadic resistance that tested their movement and target discrimination. Sarah's responses were automatic, her combat instincts overriding the years behind a desk. Wilson and Rodriguez followed, providing security as planned. "Team 3 approaching primary objective," Harris reported through the comm. "Copy, Team 3, Chandler's voice replied. "Be advised, stairwell is compromised. Proceed with caution." The warning confirmed Sarah's expectation. The stairwell would contain the scenario designed specifically to test her abilities against the modified disarmament techniques. They reached the stairwell entrance and paused for tactical assessment. Harris glanced at Sarah, silently requesting input. "Standard covering pattern," she directed. "I'll take point up the stairs. Harris covers from the landing. Wilson and Rodriguez maintain the security on R6. Harris nodded, though surprise flickered briefly across his features. Sarah was volunteering for the most dangerous position, exactly where Chandler wanted her. She moved into the stairwell, carefully weapon tracking potential threat locations. The dim emergency lighting created deep shadows between floors, ideal for concealment. Sarah ascended slowly, each step deliberate as she checked corners and potential ambush points. Halfway up, movement flashed above her. A figure emerged suddenly from concealment weapon, already drawn and aimed directly at her. The scenario had been engineered precisely as she anticipated, a close-quarters confrontation, requiring immediate disarmament. In that fraction of a second, Sarah made her decision. Instead of employing Chandler's flawed technique, she executed a modified disarmament maneuver from her Delta Force training. Her body pivoted smoothly, creating angular displacement, while her left hand directed the weapon's muzzle away from her center line. Simultaneously, her right hand established control of the attacker's wrist, applying pressure to specific nerve clusters that compromise grip strength. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. The hostile operator's weapon discharged harmlessly into the wall as Sarah completed the disarmament, securing the weapon while maintaining control of her opponent. The surprised expression on the role player's face confirmed he'd expected a different response, likely anticipating Sarah would attempt Chandler's modified technique. "Threat neutralized," she reported calmly, securing the captured weapon. "Proceed to objective." Chandler's voice carried an edge of irritation. The team continued their advance, clearing the second floor systematically until they located the non-combatant target in the eastern office section. Sarah and Harris secured the asset while Wilson and Rodriguez established a defensive perimeter. They completed the extraction through the designated exit point, 3 minutes under the allocated time frame. Outside the kill house, the operators removed their tactical gear and debriefed their performance. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor despite the evaluating stares from other teams. She had revealed more of her true capabilities than intended, but the demonstration had been necessary to counter Chandler's setup. Lieutenant Colonel Morgan approached as the debriefing concluded. "Impressive performance, Sergeant Blackwood. Your tactical abilities exceed what your file suggested." "Thank you, sir. I try to maintain operational proficiency despite administrative duties." Morgan studied her with newfound interest. "The disarmament technique you employed on the stairwell, that wasn't our standard protocol. It was the appropriate response to the specific threat configuration," Sarah replied neutrally. Before Morgan could inquire further, Captain Chandler interrupted his expression, barely masking his displeasure. Lieutenant Colonel, we need to discuss the next rotation. As the two officers stepped away, Harris moved beside Sarah. That was Delta Force methodology. Third-generation close-quarters protocol that's only taught to Tier 1 operators. I've studied various tactical systems. Sarah maintained her cover despite knowing Harris wasn't deceived. Right. Harris checked to ensure no one was within earshot. Chandler's pissed. You were supposed to fail using his modified technique, not demonstrate a superior alternative. He'll escalate now. Good. Escalation creates opportunities. Martinez approached his expression guarded. Sergeant Blackwood, Lieutenant Colonel Morgan requests your presence in the command center for exercise review. The command center occupied a secure section of the administrative building filled with monitoring equipment and tactical displays. Morgan waited beside a large screen showing footage from the Kill House exercise. Chandler stood nearby, arms crossed and jaw tight with barely contained anger. Two other officers Sarah didn't recognize occupied workstations monitoring ongoing training activities. Sergeant, Morgan gestured to a chair across from his position. Please sit. We have some questions about today's exercise. Sarah complied, maintaining calm professionalism despite the obvious tension in the room. Chandler remained standing, his posture communicating clear hostility. Your performance today was exceptional, Morgan began, particularly for someone who's supposedly been in administrative roles for 5 years. I maintain proficiency whenever possible, sir. The technique you employed in the stairwell, Chandler interjected, directly contradicted established protocols for this facility. It was tactically sound, Sarah responded evenly. It wasn't authorized, Chandler countered, his voice hardening. Operators follow established methodologies to ensure predictable outcomes and team coordination. Morgan raised a hand, silencing Chandler's building tirade. What interests me, Sergeant, is where you learned that particular technique. It's not standard curriculum outside specialized units. Sarah recognized the dangerous territory. Morgan was probing her background, seeking confirmation of capabilities that didn't align with her cover story. She needed to provide enough truth to seem forthcoming while maintaining her mission parameters. Joint training exercise with Special Operations Units, sir, before my injury and reassignment to intelligence analysis. Morgan nodded slowly, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with her answer. Your file mentions combat experience in Afghanistan, but lacks specifics about your tactical training. Some aspects were compartmentalized for operational security. Chandler stepped forward. She's lying, sir. That technique is exclusive to Delta Force methodology. No regular Army sergeant would have access to that training. Captain, Morgan's tone carried warning. Remember yourself. With respect, sir, her presence here requires explanation. Chandler gestured to the footage still playing on the screen. She demonstrates Tier 1 operator capabilities while claiming to be conducting a safety assessment. Either her file is false or her purpose here is misrepresented. The confrontation had reached its critical point sooner than Sarah anticipated. She weighed her options carefully, aware that revealing too much could compromise her investigation, while revealing too little might result in restricted access. Colonel Hammond requested my assessment specifically because of my diverse tactical background, she offered. Safety protocols require evaluation from multiple methodological perspectives. Morgan studied her for a long moment before responding. Hammond and I go back many years, Sergeant. If he sent you, he had his reasons. He turned to Chandler. Captain, continue with the scheduled exercises. I'd like to speak with Sergeant Blackwood privately. Chandler's expression darkened, but he complied with the order, exiting the command center with rigid formality. The other officers followed, leaving Sarah alone with Morgan. When the door closed, Morgan's demeanor shifted subtly. Now, Sergeant, let's discuss why Hammond really sent you. Sarah maintained her cover. Sir, as I explained. Stop. Morgan's tone was firm but not hostile. Hammond doesn't deploy someone with your obvious capabilities for routine safety assessment. Not after 3 operator deaths using modified techniques. Not when those techniques originated from my command. He leaned forward, eyes locking with hers. I want to know what he suspects and why he didn't come to me directly. Sarah calculated her response carefully. Revealing partial truth might gain Morgan's cooperation if he wasn't involved in the sabotage. Continued deception risked alienating a potential ally. Sir, there are concerns about the modified close quarters combat protocols implemented over the past 8 months. The techniques contain subtle but critical flaws that wouldn't be apparent in training environments but could prove fatal in actual combat. Morgan's expression remained neutral, and Hammond believes these modifications were deliberate. It wasn't a question. Sarah noted the implication Morgan had already considered this possibility. The evidence suggests systematic alteration of proven methodologies in ways that create exploitable vulnerabilities, she confirmed. Vulnerabilities that align precisely with the circumstances surrounding the Echo team casualties. Morgan was silent for several moments, processing this information. Finally, he rose and moved to a secure terminal, entering a complex password that unlocked a protected database. 2 months ago, I began my own investigation after the second Echo team death. He brought up a series of training modification approvals on the screen. These changes were implemented gradually, each supported by detailed performance data and recommendation reports, all properly documented, all following security protocols. Sarah examined the documentation, noting the progressive nature of the modifications, small changes that individually seemed reasonable but collectively transformed effective techniques into compromised methodologies. Captain Chandler submitted most of these recommendations, Morgan continued, but his proposals required technical verification and security clearance from higher authorities, multiple checkpoints, multiple approvals, suggesting either multiple compromised personnel or falsified approval chains, Sarah concluded. Morgan nodded grimly. Exactly why I didn't immediately report my concerns through standard channels. If the system is compromised, alerting it becomes dangerous. Have you identified the source of the technical verification? That's where things become interesting. Morgan pulled up another file. Technical verification for most modifications came through a classified program designated Project Icarus with security protocols that exceed my clearance level. Sarah controlled her reaction, though the confirmation of Hammond's information was significant. Project Icarus, what do you know about it? Officially nothing. It's classified above my level despite my position. Morgan's frustration was evident. Unofficially, it's a Cold War relic supposedly discontinued in the late 1980s, something related to Soviet counter techniques. You've researched it, as much as possible without triggering security flags. Morgan closed the files. 2 weeks after I began those inquiries, Captain Chandler was assigned to my command, bringing with him updated training protocols from higher headquarters. The implication was clear. Morgan's investigation had been noticed, and Chandler placed to monitor him while implementing the compromise techniques. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked. Because Hammond wouldn't send you unless he had information I don't. Morgan's expression hardened. 3 of my operators are dead, Sergeant. If someone's compromised our training, I want them identified and handled, officially or otherwise. Sarah weighed her options before responding. Colonel Hammond has history with Project Icarus from the Cold War era. He recognized elements of Soviet counter techniques in the modified protocols. Morgan absorbed this information. That's why he sent you. Someone with the tactical background to identify the flaws in the intelligence training to investigate the source. My investigation has confirmed deliberate modification of key techniques to create vulnerabilities exploitable by opponents trained in specific counter methodologies. Sarah maintained eye contact with Morgan. The question remains, who has access to implement these changes through your command structure? Besides Chandler, only 2 others. Major Erickson, my executive officer, and Master Sergeant Martinez, who oversees technical implementation. Morgan paused. I've known both for years. Neither seems likely, but trust requires verification, Sarah finished. Morgan nodded. What's your next step? I need access to all training modification records for the past 12 months, particularly any references to Project Icarus or external technical verification. That access would trigger security notifications to multiple channels. Then we need an alternative approach. Sarah considered the possibilities. The training database maintains backup archives on a secured server, correct? Yes, but physical access is restricted to authorized personnel. Someone with your command authorization could conduct a routine security audit without triggering external notifications. Morgan understood immediately, creating an opportunity for additional access. Precisely. Their planning was interrupted by an urgent knock. Martinez entered without waiting for permission, his expression grave. "Sir, there's been an incident on the range. Sergeant Harris has been shot." Sarah's focus sharpened instantly. "How bad?" "Training round to the throat, similar to the previous incident." Martinez's eyes met hers briefly. "He's been transported to medical. Chandler claims weapons malfunction, but Harris identified flaws in the training protocols." Sarah finished. This wasn't coincidence. Morgan was already moving toward the door. "Martinez, secure the range and preserve all evidence. No one touches anything until I personally review the scene." As they hurried toward the medical facility, Sarah processed the implications. Harris had been targeted specifically because of his connection to her investigation. Chandler was eliminating potential threats and sending a clear warning. The base medical center was a modern facility equipped for combat trauma care. They found Harris in the treatment area, medical personnel working efficiently around him. Though conscious, his breathing was labored, his neck showing the distinctive bruising pattern of a simulation round impact. Morgan used his authority to clear the room briefly, allowing them private conversation. Sarah approached the bed while Martinez stood guard at the door. "Who shot you?" she asked directly. Harris grimaced through the pain. "Didn't see. Round came from the peripheral area while I was instructing juniors on proper stance." "Sniper position." "Possibly. Perfect shot to the trachea." Harris's voice was raspy. "Simulation round but modified. Higher velocity than standard. Medical says quarter-inch deeper would have crushed my windpipe completely." Sarah exchanged glances with Morgan. This wasn't a warning. It was an attempted elimination disguised as training accident. "They know," Harris confirmed. "After your performance today, they realized you're not just assessing safety. They're accelerating whatever they've planned." "Who's they?" Morgan pressed. Harris shook his head slightly. "Uncertain. But after you left the range, Chandler received a call. He seemed agitated afterward, started checking security schedules. I tried to get closer to overhear then." He gestured to his injured throat. Medical staff returned, insisting on continuing treatment. Morgan guided Sarah outside where Martinez waited. "Chandler has disappeared from the facility," Martinez reported quietly. "Signed out for urgent personal business 10 minutes after the shooting." "Track his vehicle," Morgan ordered. "Already tried. GPS disabled once he left the main gate." Sarah processed this development. "He's meeting with whoever gave him orders to eliminate Harris. We need to find that meeting." "How?" Morgan asked. "He's gone dark." "Not completely." Sarah turned to Martinez. "You oversee equipment requisition. Does Chandler have a personal tactical radio? Something he might use for secure communication outside official channels." Martinez considered this. "He maintains a private frequency for specialized training scenarios. Claims it's to prevent cross-communication during complex exercises." "Can you access that frequency without alerting him?" "Possibly, though monitoring personal communications without authorization is." 3 operators are dead, and Harris nearly joined in them. Morgan interrupted. "Authorization granted under my command, emergency protocols." Martinez nodded. "I'll need 15 minutes to configure the equipment." As he departed, Morgan turned to Sarah. "If Chandler realizes he's being monitored, he won't. But we need to prepare for rapid response once we locate him." Sarah glanced toward the medical facility. "And we need security for Harris. Whoever is behind this will try again. I'll assign trusted personnel." Morgan lowered his voice. "Should we contact Hammond?" Sarah shook her head. "Not yet. If communications are being monitored, it could compromise his position and our investigation." They relocated to a secure communications room where Martinez had prepared monitoring equipment for Chandler's private frequency. For 20 minutes, they detected nothing but standard background noise. Then abruptly, a voice broke through. "Approaching rendezvous point." Chandler's distinctive tone was unmistakable despite the slight distortion. A second voice responded, the transmission quality making identification difficult. "Confirmation required." "Midnight Ghost," Chandler replied. Sarah and Morgan exchanged significant glances at the code phrase, direct reference to the Cold War operation Hammond had described. "Proceed to secondary location," the unknown voice instructed. "Standard protocols." The transmission ended, leaving them with minimal, actionable information. Martinez adjusted equipment settings, attempting to enhance the recorded audio. Voice pattern analysis might identify the second speaker, he suggested, though quality is insufficient for definitive matching. Sarah focused on the critical element. Midnight Ghost. That's the confirmation code. Hammond's operation from the 1980s, Morgan noted. Whoever Chandler is meeting has direct knowledge of classified Cold War operations. The rendezvous location is key, Sarah analyzed. Standard protocols suggest predefined meeting points, somewhere secure, isolated, but accessible. Martinez considered this. Chandler frequently uses an abandoned warehouse facility 10 miles northwest for specialized night training, claims the environment provides realistic urban combat scenarios. That fits, Sarah confirmed. We need to move quickly. Morgan made an immediate decision. Martinez prepared tactical gear for the three of us. Full equipment communications blackout protocol. Sir, Martinez questioned, if this conspiracy reaches into higher command levels, standard communication channels can't be trusted. Morgan's expression hardened. This operation exists outside official channels until we determine the extent of the compromise. Sarah recognized the significant risk Morgan was taking. By operating without authorization, he was placing his career and potentially his freedom at stake. The decision indicated his commitment to protecting his operators transcended institutional loyalties. I should inform you, Sarah said quietly as Martinez departed, that depending on what we discover, this could extend beyond Fort Harrison. The implications of Soviet counter techniques being deliberately integrated into special operations training suggest foreign intelligence involvement. Morgan nodded grimly. I've considered that possibility, which is precisely why we're handling this ourselves first. If foreign assets have compromised our command structure, standard reporting channels become liabilities. They prepared methodically collecting equipment while maintaining normal operational appearances. Sarah retrieved Hammond's M1911A1 from her secure drawer, the weapon's familiar weight reinforcing the connection to past operations that suddenly seemed critically relevant to present dangers. As darkness fell over Fort Harrison, Sarah, Morgan, and Martinez slipped away from the main compound in an unmarked vehicle communication devices disabled to prevent tracking. The conspiracy that had claimed 3 operators and nearly killed a 4th was about to face its reckoning one way or another. The abandoned warehouse loomed against the night sky, its deteriorated structure creating perfect concealment for their approach. Sarah observed multiple vehicles parked in the shadows, Chandler's personal truck among them. The meeting was indeed happening here. 3 entry points, Sarah noted, assessing the building's layout. Main entrance, loading dock, rear emergency exit. Surveillance first, Morgan directed. Confirm participants before engagement. They approached silently, using natural cover to conceal their movement. The warehouse interior showed minimal lighting, just enough to illuminate a central area where several figures had gathered. From their elevated observation position, Sarah identified Chandler immediately. The second figure remained partially obscured, but something about the posture triggered recognition in Sarah's mind. As they watched a third participant emerge from the shadows, the man's face became visible in the dim light, and Sarah felt Morgan tense beside her. That's impossible, he whispered. Sarah studied the newest arrival, an older man whose bearings suggested military background despite civilian clothing. You recognize him? Morgan's voice carried disbelief tinged with dawning anger. General Victor Hayes, former commander of Special Operations Development Mod, retired 3 years ago. Hayes, Sarah repeated the name, triggering connections to Hammond's briefing. Was he involved with Cold War special operations? Extensively. His career began in Berlin during the 1980s. Morgan's expression hardened. He would have had access to everything from that era, including Project Icarus, Sarah finished. The pieces aligned with chilling clarity. General Hayes had the knowledge, access, and authority to implement Soviet counter techniques into modern training. The question remained, why would a decorated American general deliberately compromise special operations methodology? As they continued surveillance, the second figure finally moved into better lighting. Martinez inhaled sharply beside them. Major Erickson, he identified, Morgan's executive officer. The conspiracy extended further than they had anticipated, reaching into Fort Harrison's direct command structure. Sarah analyzed the implications rapidly. With Hayes's historical knowledge, Erickson's command access, and Chandler's training authority, they had created a perfect mechanism for systematically compromising special operations capabilities. The 3 conspirators engaged in intense discussion, their voices too distant to overhear. Sarah observed their body language, noting Chandler's defensive posture contrasting with Hayes's authoritative gestures. "We need to get closer," she whispered, "determine their immediate plans." Morgan nodded agreement. "Martinez, maintain overwatch position. Signal if anyone else approaches. Sergeant Blackwood and I will advance to listening position." They moved silently toward the warehouse, using deteriorated architectural features for concealment. Sarah's operator training resurfaced completely as she navigated the approach with practiced efficiency, minimizing exposure while maximizing tactical advantage. They reached an external ventilation opening that provided both concealment and acoustic channeling from the main space. From this position, fragments of conversation became audible. "Compromised our entire operation," Hayes was saying, his tone sharp with anger. "Your failure to eliminate Harris immediately after he questioned the protocols." "I had no clean opportunity," Chandler defended. "And now with Blackwood's arrival—" "Blackwood," Hayes interrupted. "James Blackwood's daughter. Why wasn't I informed immediately?" The recognition of her family connection sent a chill through Sarah. Hayes knew her father from the Cold War operations. "Hammond sent her," Erickson explained. "Claims she's conducting safety assessment, but she demonstrated Delta Force disarmament techniques during today's exercise." "Hammond." Hayes practically spat the name, still meddling after all these years. He never understood the bigger picture. "The final integration is scheduled for next week," Chandler redirected. "Once implemented across all special operations training, the vulnerability will be established throughout the entire Tier 1 capability." "And our payment?" Erickson asked. "Upon confirmation of successful implementation." Hayes removed a small device from his pocket. "This drive contains the final modifications. Apply them precisely as documented. The structural weakness must appear completely legitimate." Sarah and Morgan exchanged glances, the confirmation of deliberate sabotage now undeniable. They had identified the conspiracy, but still lacked the ultimate motivation. Who was Hayes working for, and what was their objective in compromising America's elite fighters? The answer came moments later. "Our Russian partners are most satisfied with the progress," Hayes continued, 30 years developing this opportunity. "When the conflict comes, their forces will exploit the predictable vulnerabilities we've created. Strategic advantage through tactical manipulation." "Treason," Morgan whispered, the single word carrying the weight of profound betrayal. Sarah's mind raced through implications and options. They had confirmed the conspiracy extended to the highest levels, involving a retired command personnel with access to classified historical operations. Hayes had been selling American special operations vulnerabilities to Russian intelligence, likely for decades. "We should withdraw," she whispered to Morgan. "Report findings to Hammond and authorize official intervention." Morgan nodded agreement. They began careful retreat from their position when Sarah noticed movement near their parked vehicle. Through her tactical optics, she identified armed personnel establishing perimeter positions, at least 6 operatives with military-grade weapons and equipment. "We're surrounded," she informed Morgan quietly. "Professional team tactical positioning." Hayes brought security, Morgan concluded. He suspected potential surveillance. Their options narrowed dramatically. Retreat was compromised, communications remained disabled to prevent tracking, and they were outnumbered by an unknown tactical team. The situation had deteriorated from intelligence gathering to survival scenario. "Martinez is exposed in the overwatch position," Sarah noted. "They'll find him during perimeter sweep." Morgan processed this with experienced calculation. "We need to extract Martinez first, then create diversion for escape." "Agreed, but we also need evidence." Sarah nodded toward the warehouse. "Hayes has the complete documentation on that drive. Without it, this remains unsubstantiated accusation against a decorated general." The mission parameters had evolved beyond investigation to active counterintelligence operation. They would need to secure evidence, neutralize immediate threats, and extract safely with the intelligence. The complexity and risk had escalated beyond their initial parameters, but the stakes demanded immediate action. Sarah checked her weapon, the weight of Hammond's M1911A1, a tangible connection to past operations against Soviet intelligence. History was repeating itself in unexpected ways, and she found herself continuing her father's unfinished mission from decades earlier. "We take Martinez first," she decided. "Then breach the warehouse, secure the evidence, and extract through the secondary perimeter where coverage appears weakest." Morgan nodded agreement. "On your lead, Sergeant." As they prepared to move, Sarah observed additional armed personnel entering the warehouse. The window for action was closing rapidly as Hayes consolidated his security forces. Whatever happened next would determine not just their survival, but the integrity of America's special operations capabilities against foreign compromise. Sarah advanced silently toward Martinez's position, the mission now transformed into a direct confrontation with traitors who had spent decades undermining national security from within. The showdown at the abandoned warehouse would either expose the conspiracy or bury its discovery permanently, along with those who had uncovered it. Sarah moved with practiced silence toward Martinez's overwatch position, her steps guided by years of covert operations training. The warehouse's deteriorating exterior provided natural concealment as she navigated between shadows cast by the moonlight. Her senses heightened, she detected subtle movement at the perimeter's edge, Hayes' security team establishing their cordon. When she reached Martinez, he was already alert to the approaching threat, his military instincts having registered the same tactical movements she'd observed. Six-man team, he whispered as she took position beside him. Professional formation, military precision, not contractors. Spetsnaz methodology, Sarah confirmed, recognizing the distinctive approach pattern. Russian Special Forces operators or direct trainees. Martinez's expression hardened. So it's true. Hayes is working with Russian intelligence. For decades, apparently. Sarah quickly outlined their extraction plan. Morgan's waiting at the east corner. We need to move now before their perimeter sweep reaches this position. They descended from the overwatch point using the building's architectural features for concealment. Twice they froze as security personnel passed within meters of their position, the Russian operators demonstrating the professional discipline of elite forces. When they rejoined Morgan, his expression conveyed urgency. The security team is establishing a full perimeter lockdown, he reported quietly. Communications jamming will activate once they've completed positioning. We have minutes at most. Sarah assessed their tactical situation. Hayes is meeting inside with high-value intelligence, the complete sabotage protocols on that drive. We need that evidence to prove the conspiracy extends beyond Fort Harrison. Agreed, but direct confrontation against superior numbers with unknown capabilities presents unacceptable risk, Morgan countered. Martinez checked his weapon. What about creating a diversion? Draw their security away from the warehouse long enough to extract Hayes in the drive. Sarah considered the angles, mapping potential approaches mentally. The loading dock provides the most direct access to their meeting location, but it'll be heavily watched. The rear emergency exit might be less secure. I can create a diversion at the northwest corner, Martinez offered. Draw attention away from your approach. Morgan nodded. I'll secure our exfiltration route through the eastern perimeter. Once you have the evidence, we rendezvous at Extraction Point Alpha. The plan established, they separated to execute their assigned elements. Sarah moved toward the rear of the warehouse, maintaining shadow discipline as she approached the emergency exit. Martinez would initiate his diversion in precisely 3 minutes, providing her narrow window of opportunity to breach the structure undetected. Inside the warehouse, Hayes continued his meeting with Chandler and Erickson, unaware of the approaching confrontation. Sarah positioned herself near the emergency door, checking the ancient 1911A1 Hammond had given her. The weapon had served in Cold War operations against Soviet intelligence. Now it would help complete the mission Hammond and her father had begun decades earlier. The distinctive crack of gunfire erupted from the northwest corner, Martinez creating his diversion with perfectly timed precision. Sarah heard immediate radio chatter among the security team, followed by the sound of multiple operators moving to investigate the threat. The emergency door security detail hesitated, torn between maintaining position and responding to the apparent attack. Sarah seized the momentary confusion to move. She approached from their blind spot using the techniques she'd mastered during her Delta Force training. The first guard registered her presence too late as she applied a precise carotid restraint that rendered him unconscious within seconds. The second guard turned just as she closed distance, but her strike to his brachial plexus disrupted neuromuscular function before he could raise his weapon. Both guards neutralized without gunfire. Sarah accessed the emergency door, finding it secured with an electronic lock. She removed a compact bypass device from her tactical gear and applied it to the control panel. The specialized equipment overrode the security protocols, granting access without triggering alarms. The warehouse interior was cavernous, its abandoned industrial equipment creating a maze of potential concealment. Sarah advanced silently toward the central area where Hayes had established his meeting, using the building's support columns for cover. The continuing distraction outside had drawn most security personnel away from the interior, but she maintained vigilant awareness of her surroundings. She reached a position overlooking the central meeting area. Hayes was gesturing emphatically while Chandler and Erickson listened with expressions combining fear and determination. The small data drive containing the sabotage training protocols sat on an improvised table between them. The implementation timeline is non-negotiable, Hayes was saying, his tone brooking no argument. Moscow has waited 3 decades for this operational advantage. The final modifications must be in place before next month's joint exercises. The investigation complicates matters, Erickson responded. Hammond's involvement wasn't anticipated, nor was Blackwood's presence. Hammond is predictable, Hayes dismissed. His Cold War paranoia makes him vulnerable to misdirection. As for Blackwood, his expression darkened. Her father nearly exposed our operation in '85. History won't repeat itself. The direct threat against her crystallized Sarah's resolve. She had intended to capture Hayes and secure the evidence for official channels, but the operational reality now demanded immediate intervention. The Russian security team wouldn't remain distracted indefinitely. Sarah drew Hammond's M1911A1 and moved from cover, approaching with tactical precision. Federal intelligence, nobody move. The 3 conspirators froze momentarily before reacting with varying degrees of alarm. Erickson reached instinctively toward his sidearm, while Chandler stood paralyzed. Hayes, however, maintained remarkable composure, his decades of covert operations experience evident in his measured response. Sergeant Blackwood, Hayes's voice carried no surprise, only cold calculation. Your father had the same unfortunate talent for inconvenient timing. Step away from the table. Sarah directed her weapon-trained center mass. Hands where I can see them. Erickson hesitated, his hand hovering near his weapon. Hayes gave an almost imperceptible nod, and both men raised their hands slowly. Chandler followed suit, his expression revealing dawning understanding that he'd been entangled in something far beyond his ambition. This is quite unnecessary, Sergeant, Hayes said smoothly. You're operating outside your jurisdiction and authority. Whatever Hammond has told you is fragments of classified operations he never fully understood. 3 dead operators and Project Icarus reactivated without authorization says otherwise. Sarah countered, maintaining her position while reaching for the data drive with her free hand. Hayes smiled thinly. Project Icarus was never deactivated, merely recategorized. What you're interpreting as treason is actually deep cover counterintelligence with highest level authorization. Check my credentials before making career-ending accusations. The practiced deception might have worked on someone less experienced, but Sarah recognized the classic intelligence misdirection technique. Save it for your tribunal general. Right now, you're coming with me to explain why you're implementing Soviet counter techniques into American Special Operations training. Her fingers closed around the data drive just as the warehouse's side door burst open. 2 security operators entered, weapons raised, having abandoned their perimeter positions despite the continuing diversion. Sarah made an instantaneous tactical decision, diving behind a concrete support column as gunfire erupted. Hayes seized the momentary chaos to flee toward the warehouse's rear exit, shouting orders in Russian to his security team. Erickson followed immediately while Chandler hesitated, caught between conflicting loyalties. Chandler, Sarah called out from her position, they're using you. Those techniques have killed your own operators. Indecision paralyzed him momentarily before he ducked behind equipment, avoiding both Sarah's position and Hayes's retreat. The security operators maintained suppressive fire, preventing Sarah from pursuing Hayes directly. Sarah keyed her tactical radio. Morgan Hayes is heading toward the east exit with Erickson. Russian security forces engaged inside. Copy, Morgan's voice crackled through the comm. Martinez is pinned down northwest. I'll intercept Hayes. The intensity of gunfire increased as Sarah evaluated her options. Direct engagement against superior firepower would be tactically unsound, but allowing Hayes to escape with his knowledge of the conspiracy was unacceptable. She still had the data drive secured in her tactical vest, critical evidence, but Hayes himself represented the linchpin of the entire operation. Sarah identified a deteriorated overhead catwalk, providing potential movement toward the exit Hayes had taken. Using covering fire to create momentary diversion, she ascended quickly to the elevated position. The metal structure groaned under her weight but held as she advanced rapidly along its length, maintaining low profile to minimize exposure. The Russian operators adjusted their position, attempting to track her movement through the warehouse's complex interior. Their disciplined fire patterns confirmed Sarah's initial assessment. These weren't ordinary security contractors, but specialized military personnel with advanced tactical training. She reached the end of the catwalk near the exit Hayes had used and observed Morgan engaged in hand-to-hand combat with one of Hayes's security detail. Morgan's decades of experience showed in his efficient movements as he neutralized his opponent with a precisely executed takedown. Sarah descended from the catwalk using a support cable, her tactical descent controlled despite the urgency. As her boots touched the concrete floor, she registered movement to her right. Chandler, his weapon drawn, but pointed downward. "They lied to me," he said, his voice unsteady. "Said it was classified counterterrorism methodology, advanced techniques to prepare our operators for emerging threats. They manipulated you to compromise American special forces," Sarah confirmed, maintaining tactical awareness of their surroundings. "Those modifications have already killed 3 operators and nearly claimed Harris." Chandler's expression reflected growing horror as the full implications registered. Hayes said the changes were approved at the highest levels, that questioning them would compromise national security. "Classic manipulation tactics," Sarah replied, using partial truth and appeal to authority to facilitate betrayal. The warehouse echoed with continued gunfire as the Russian operators engaged Martinez's position. Sarah needed to pursue Hayes immediately, but Chandler represented both a potential threat and valuable intelligence source. "Make your choice, Captain," she said firmly. "Continue supporting traitors or help me stop them from killing more American operators." Chandler's internal conflict played across his features before resolution hardened his expression. "East exit leads to a secondary facility, underground bunker from the Cold War era. Hayes mentioned using it for secure communications." "Show me," Sarah directed, allowing Chandler to take point while maintaining tactical positioning that would allow immediate response if his cooperation proved false. They moved through the exit into the night air, immediately encountering the aftermath of Morgan's confrontation with Hayes' security. 2 neutralized operators lay secured with tactical restraints, while Morgan himself was nowhere visible. Morgan pursued them, Sarah concluded, identifying fresh tracks leading toward a concealed path beyond the warehouse perimeter. Chandler nodded. "The bunker entrance is camouflaged in the hillside 300 meters east. Restricted access biometric security." "Which you have," Sarah surmised. "Yes, Hayes added me to the system last month for contingency planning." They advanced along the path, moving with tactical discipline through the wooded terrain. Sarah maintained communication silence, aware that Hayes likely monitored standard frequencies. The moonlight provided sufficient illumination to navigate without compromising their position with artificial light. As they approached the hillside, Chandler had indicated Sarah detected signs of recent disturbance, vegetation crushed by multiple individuals moving with urgent purpose. The bunker entrance was masterfully concealed, its weathered exterior blending with the natural rock formation. Only subtle indicators betrayed its artificial nature to trained observation. "Security system includes motion detection and thermal imaging," Chandler warned as they drew closer. "Hayes will know we're approaching." Then we abandoned stealth for speed, Sarah decided, recognizing that tactical surprise was no longer viable. "Can you bypass the door security? My access should still be active unless they've already locked me out." They approached the entrance directly, Chandler placing his palm on the disguised scanner. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then the ancient mechanism engaged with hydraulic precision, the camouflage door receding to reveal a concrete passage descending into the earth. Hayes reactivated this facility when he began implementing Project Icarus, Chandler explained as they entered the narrow corridor. Said it provided appropriate security for sensitive operations outside normal chains of command. The passage opened into a larger chamber filled with both vintage Cold War equipment and modern communications technology. The facility had clearly been upgraded incrementally over decades, creating an operational center completely disconnected from official oversight. Signs of recent evacuation were evident throughout the space equipment, Disconnected documents, removed storage areas emptied. Hayes had initiated emergency protocols attempting to eliminate evidence of the operation before extraction. "They're destroying everything," Chandler observed, "but not fast enough," Sarah countered, noting a secondary passage leading deeper into the facility. That way, communications center and Hayes's private office. They advanced cautiously, aware that remaining security personnel would be concentrated around Hayes during evacuation. The passage terminated at a security door with both electronic lock and reinforced construction. "My access won't work here," Chandler admitted. "Hayes's private domain." Sarah examined the security system, identifying its operational architecture. Soviet design modernized with American components. Hybrid system reflecting the operation itself. "Can you bypass it? Not quickly or quietly." Sarah assessed their tactical options, "which means we don't treat." She removed a compact breaching charge from her tactical gear and placed it precisely at the door's structural weak point. The specialized device was designed for minimal collateral effect with maximum targeted impact. "Cover," she instructed, positioning herself against the passage wall, with Chandler following suit. The breach detonated with controlled precision, compromising the door's locking mechanism without destabilizing the surrounding structure. Sarah moved immediately through the opening, weapon ready, as she entered Hayes's inner sanctum. The room beyond contained comprehensive communications equipment and documentation storage. Hayes stood at the far end alongside Erickson, both men in the process of destroying evidence. Morgan knelt nearby, restrained and showing signs of recent struggle. Hayes turned at their entrance, his expression calculating rather than surprised. "Persistence runs in your family, Sergeant Blackwood." "Federal intelligence," Sarah repeated her earlier declaration. "You're under arrest for treason and espionage." Hayes smiled thinly. "You continue operating under the misapprehension that this is unauthorized activity." He gestured to an open safe where document destruction was underway. 30 years of sanctioned deep cover counterintelligence that you're compromising with amateur heroics. Sanctioned by whom? Your Russian handlers. Sarah maintained her position, weapon trained on Hayes, while maintaining awareness of Erickson's location and potential movement. "By individuals with clearance levels you can't imagine," Hayes countered smoothly. "This facility exists for contingency operations beyond conventional oversight, operations essential for national security." "Sabotaging American special operations methodology serves national security," Morgan challenged from his restrained position, voice tight with controlled anger. "Sometimes protection requires controlled vulnerability," Hayes replied without hesitation. "Creating known weaknesses allows anticipation of exploitation. Strategic sacrifice for tactical advantage." The practiced deception might have seemed plausible to uninformed observers, but Sarah recognized the classic intelligence tactic, wrapping betrayal in patriotic justification, using partial truths to conceal complete deception. "The Russian communication and financial transfers suggest otherwise," she said calmly, revealing knowledge of intelligence Hammond had provided. "As does the elimination of American operators who identified the flaws." Hayes's expression hardened, the facade of reasonable explanation dropping away. "You understand nothing. The Cold War never ended. It merely transformed. America's arrogance since the Soviet collapse created vulnerability greater than any physical weakness. I've ensured balance remains." "By selling out your country," Chandler's voice carried the shock of personal betrayal. "By preventing catastrophic miscalculation," Hayes snapped. "Mutually assured vulnerability preserves equilibrium. Strategic balance requires managed weakness alongside overwhelming strength." As Hayes spoke, Sarah noticed Erickson slowly repositioning himself toward a concealed weapon. The Major's movement was deliberately subtle, designed to escape casual observation while preparing for decisive action. "And the dead operators," Sarah pressed, maintaining Hayes's attention while tracking Erickson's movement peripherally. "Collateral damage for your philosophical balance. Necessary sacrifice," Hayes confirmed without remorse. "Individuals mean nothing against historical forces. Your father understood that before his inconvenient attack of conscience." The mention of her father provided final confirmation. Hayes had been involved in the original betrayal decades earlier, the security breach that had compromised Operation Midnight Ghost and led to American casualties. My father discovered your treason in 1985, Sarah stated, pieces aligning into coherent picture. You were Frost, the Soviet asset Hammond never identified. Hayes's expression revealed nothing but his slight hesitation confirmed her assertion. Hammond's obsession with absolute loyalty blinded him to complex reality. The Cold War required more sophisticated approach than his simplistic patriotism allowed. Erickson had nearly reached his weapon. Sarah made the tactical decision to force confrontation before he achieved firing position. It's over, Hayes. The evidence is secured, your operation exposed. She gestured subtly toward Chandler. Even your own assets recognize the betrayal. Hayes glanced briefly toward Chandler, registering his presence with calculated reassessment. That momentary distraction provided Sarah the opportunity she needed. With fluid motion born from years of specialized training, she executed a precision disarmament technique against Erickson just as he grasped his concealed weapon. Her movement caught him mid-draw, her left hand directing the weapon's muzzle away from centerline, while her right established control of his wrist through specific pressure points that compromised grip strength. The technique one Hammond had helped develop during Cold War operations executed flawlessly as she disarmed Erickson before he could bring the weapon to bear. Hayes reacted with surprising speed for his age, drawing a compact pistol from his jacket. Chandler moved simultaneously, tackling the general with desperate momentum that sent both men crashing into the communications equipment. Sarah completed her disarmament of Erickson with a joint manipulation that forced compliance through controlled pain application. The major yielded with grim recognition of superior technique, his expression betraying frustrated recognition. The famous Blackwood method, he muttered through clenched teeth. Hayes said your father developed it specifically against Soviet operators. Sarah secured Erickson with tactical restraints while maintaining situational awareness. Chandler had temporarily neutralized Hayes through his unexpected intervention, but the general was already regaining advantage through superior close-quarters training. Morgan, despite his restrained position, had maneuvered himself toward a fallen letter opener. Sarah noted his progress as she completed securing Erickson. The lieutenant colonel's decades of experience evident in his resourceful response to limitation. Hayes struck Chandler with practiced efficiency, a targeted blow to the solar plexus that disrupted breathing and created immediate incapacitation. The captain collapsed, gasping for air, as Hayes retrieved his weapon and turned towards Sarah. Disappointing, the general remarked with cold professionalism. I expected Hammond's protege to present greater challenge. Sarah assessed the tactical situation with instantaneous clarity. Hayes stood 7 meters distant, weapon already drawn and oriented in her direction. Conventional response would result in mutual engagement with high probability of fatal outcome for both. The situation demanded unconventional solution, precisely what her specialized training had prepared her to execute. Hammond sends his regards, she replied calmly, the statement causing momentary confusion in Hayes's expression, exactly as intended. That fractional hesitation provided the opening Sarah required. She initiated the advanced disarmament sequence Hammond had described, the technique her father had developed specifically for Cold War operations against Soviet-trained adversaries. Sarah's movement began with lateral displacement, creating angular separation from Hayes's firing position, while closing distance with explosive acceleration. The general's combat experience registered the threat immediately, his weapon tracking her movement with professional precision. The first shot discharged as Sarah executed the critical phase of the technique, the simultaneous control of Hayes's weapon arm while applying destabilizing pressure to specific anatomical weaknesses. The bullet passed harmlessly overhead as she established primary control. Hayes countered with secondary defensive technique, attempting to create separation through offensive striking. Sarah had anticipated this response, incorporating it into her calculated approach. She absorbed the impact while maintaining control of Hayes's weapon arm, the mechanism locked in midpoint position through applied leverage. The general's extensive training became evident as he executed multiple counters in rapid sequence, each met with corresponding neutralization as Sarah maintained the initiative. The exchange of technical mastery unfolded with lethal precision, decades of specialized training manifesting in seconds of concentrated combat. Morgan had freed himself during the confrontation, now moving to secure Erickson, who had begun struggling against his restraints. Chandler remained incapacitated, his breathing still compromised from Hayes's precisely targeted strike. Hayes attempted his final counter, a Soviet Sistema technique designed to exploit weight transfer during disarmament. It was the exact vulnerability his sabotage training protocols had introduced into American methodology. But Sarah recognized it instantly, having studied the original Soviet manuals Hammond had preserved from Operation Midnight Ghost. She countered with the specialized technique her father had developed, the same one Hayes had attempted to erase from American training through his decades-long conspiracy. The maneuver flowed with practiced efficiency as Sarah completed the disarmament sequence, neutralizing Hayes's weapon, while simultaneously establishing complete physical control. The entire sequence from initial engagement to final disarmament had required exactly 45 seconds. Hayes found himself completely neutralized, his weapon secured, and physical movement controlled through precise application of joint manipulation. His expression registered professional recognition of superior technique, even as anger flashed beneath the surface. "Your father's methodology," he acknowledged grimly, "the technique Moscow most feared during the Cold War. The one I spent decades eliminating from American training. The one that just ended your operation," Sarah confirmed, maintaining control, while Morgan approached with additional restraints. As Morgan secured Hayes, Sarah retrieved the general's weapon and performed a tactical assessment of the room. The facility contained comprehensive documentation of the decades-long conspiracy evidence that would prove invaluable during the official investigation that would follow. "We need to extract immediately," Morgan stated, securing the final restraint. "Martinez's diversion won't maintain their security team's attention indefinitely." Sarah nodded agreement. "Chandler, can you move?" The captain had recovered sufficiently to stand, though his breathing remained labored. "Yes. Security protocols include emergency exit through Northern Passage. Bypasses main facility. They organize rapidly for extraction, securing the prisoners while gathering essential evidence." Hayes maintained cold silence while Erickson alternated between threats and attempted negotiation. Neither received response as Sarah and Morgan prepared for immediate departure. "You've compromised critical national security operations," Hayes finally said as they approached the emergency exit. "Decades of strategic positioning eliminated through simplistic morality." "Save it for your tribunal," Morgan replied curtly. "3 of my operators are dead because of your strategic positioning." "Necessary sacrifice," Hayes repeated without remorse. "Your perspective remains frustratingly limited, Lieutenant Colonel." Sarah activated the emergency exit mechanism Chandler had identified, revealing a narrow passage leading toward the surface some distance from the main facility. The extraction route would bypass Hayes's remaining security personnel, allowing clean departure with both prisoners and evidence. "Your career is finished," Hayes said quietly to Sarah as they entered the passage. "Even if you survive politically, your operational utility is compromised. This level of unauthorized intervention carries consequences regardless of outcome." "Like your consequences in 1985, Sarah countered. "When Hammond identified a security breach, but never discovered the source, you've operated with impunity for decades while American operators died implementing your compromised techniques." Hayes's expression betrayed nothing, but his silence confirmed her assessment. The general had maintained his cover through strategic position and careful manipulation of classification systems, creating an operational shadow zone where traditional oversight became impossible. The passage emerged in densely wooded terrain several hundred meters from the warehouse. Distant gunfire indicated Martinez continued maintaining his diversion, keeping the remaining security forces occupied while their extraction proceeded. Morgan established communications with the master sergeant, coordinating final rendezvous at their predetermined extraction point. 30 minutes later, they had successfully disengaged from the area prisoners secured in their unmarked vehicle as they proceeded toward Fort Harrison. Sarah contacted Hammond through secure channel, providing concise briefing on the operation's outcome and evidence recovered. Frost identified and neutralized, she reported using the code name Hammond would recognize immediately. General Victor Hayes, conspiracy confirmed with comprehensive evidence of Russian intelligence connection. 3 conspirators in custody. Hammond's response carried controlled satisfaction. "Well done, Sarah. Your father would be proud. Secure the prisoners in isolation upon return. I'll handle the official notifications and subsequent investigation." The return to Fort Harrison proceeded without further incident. Hayes and Erickson were placed in segregated detention under Morgan's direct authority, while Chandler received medical attention for injuries sustained during the confrontation. Martinez rejoined them at the base, having successfully disengaged from the warehouse after confirming the Russian security team's withdrawal. In the secure briefing room, Sarah, Morgan, and Hammond convened to assess the operation's outcome and implications. The evidence recovered from Hayes's facility painted a disturbing picture of decades-long conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of Special Operations Command. Hayes was turned during early Berlin operations, Hammond explained, reviewing the recovered documentation. Soviet intelligence recognized his potential value and exploited ideological vulnerability. By the time Operation Midnight Ghost occurred in 1980, he was already established as high-value asset. And you never identified him, Sarah noted. We knew a breach existed, but Hayes's position and calculated loyalty displays created effective cover. Hammond's expression reflected decades-old frustration. Your father suspected someone high in command, but we lacked conclusive evidence before his deployment to the Middle East. Morgan studied the technical documentation recovered from the facility. The sabotage methodologies were brilliantly designed, subtle modifications that created exploitable vulnerabilities while appearing legitimate to casual observation. Only someone with intimate knowledge of both American and Soviet techniques could have engineered such precise compromises. Hayes's particular genius, Hammond agreed, creating weaknesses that functioned perfectly in training environments but failed catastrophically in actual combat conditions. Sarah examined the data drive containing the final modifications, the culmination of Hayes's decades-long betrayal. The implementation was scheduled for next month's joint exercises. If successful, every Tier 1 operator would have received compromised training, creating systematic vulnerability throughout special operations capability, Morgan concluded grimly. Hammond nodded. Strategic advantage through tactical manipulation, as Hayes himself described it. Russian forces would have known precisely how American operators would respond in critical scenarios, making countermeasures devastatingly effective. What happens now, Sarah asked, considering the broader implications. Comprehensive review of all training protocols implemented under Hayes's influence, Hammond replied. Identification and correction of compromised methodologies. Complete security assessment of the personnel with access to special operations training. And Hayes, closed tribunal. The evidence is overwhelming, but the political implications remain complicated. Hammond's expression hardened. 30 years of covert activity within our highest echelons creates uncomfortable questions about oversight failures. Morgan added, the operators who died deserve justice regardless of political discomfort. They'll receive it, Hammond assured him. Hayes and his conspirators will face full accountability. As the debriefing concluded, Hammond requested private conversation with Sarah. When they were alone, the colonel's formal demeanor softened slightly. Your father would be immensely proud, Sarah. He gestured to the recovered evidence. He began this investigation decades ago, suspecting Soviet penetration had compromised special operations methodology. You've completed what he started, preventing catastrophic vulnerability from being embedded throughout our elite forces. Hayes mentioned my father had an inconvenient attack of conscience, Sarah noted. What did he mean? Hammond considered this briefly before responding. James began noticing discrepancies in training modifications shortly before his final deployment. He identified potential vulnerabilities but lacked proof of deliberate sabotage. His initial investigation triggered Hayes's concern. The implication was clear, though Hammond left it unstated. Her father's death in Iraq might not have been the straightforward combat casualty reported officially. What happens with my assignment now? Sarah asked, changing the subject. Officially, you'll receive commendation for identifying critical safety deficiencies in special operations training protocols. Hammond smiled slightly. Unofficially, your operational capabilities have been rather definitively demonstrated. Your future assignment options have expanded considerably. The following morning, Sarah visited the medical facility where Harris continued recovering from his injury. The sergeant sat upright in his bed, breathing tube removed, though bruising remained evident around his throat. Heard you've been busy, he greeted her, voice still raspy from the injury. Something like that. Sarah took the chair beside his bed. Chandler's been detained pending investigation. He was manipulated by Hayes, though that doesn't excuse his actions. Hayes, Harris repeated the name. The general who visited last year when the new protocols were implemented never would have suspected. The most effective infiltration remains invisible until activated, Sarah observed. Hayes spent decades positioning himself and his methodologies. Harris studied her thoughtfully. Hammond sent you because you could recognize what the rest of us missed, the subtle flaws in techniques that looked perfect on paper. He sent me because I had the right training and motivation, Sarah corrected. The same reasons my father had for serving, protecting those who protect others. As she prepared to leave, Harris asked the question that lingered beneath their conversation. What happens now with you? Well, Sarah considered this briefly. I've been offered specialized instructor position developing advanced close quarters combat protocols. Seems there's significant demand for uncorrupted methodology focused on operator survival rather than predictable vulnerability. Harris smiled despite his injury. The famous 45-second disarmament technique Martinez described what you did to Hayes. Said it was the most impressive tactical sequence he'd witnessed in 20 years of special operations. My father's legacy, Sarah acknowledged. The technique Hayes spent decades trying to erase from American training. Now you'll ensure it survives and improves, Sarah added with quiet determination. The next generation of operators deserves every advantage we can provide. 1 week later, Sarah stood before her first training class at Fort Harrison's specialized instruction facility. 24 elite operators waited with professional attention as she prepared to begin the session. Among them sat Martinez and several others who had witnessed the warehouse operations aftermath. Lieutenant Colonel Morgan introduced her with formal precision. Sergeant Blackwood brings specialized expertise in advanced close quarters combat methodology with particular emphasis on weapon retention and disarmament techniques. Her instruction represents the foundation of our revised protocols following recent security reassessment. As Morgan departed, Sarah surveyed the assembled operators, America's finest warriors deserving of training that enhanced survival rather than creating vulnerability. The responsibility weighed appropriately on her shoulders as she began. Effective combat technique balances offensive capability with defensive integrity. She stated, her voice carrying the authority of proven expertise. What I'm about to demonstrate represents decades of specialized development, beginning during Cold War operations and refined through actual combat application. Sarah moved to the center of the training area. The methodology you'll learn eliminates vulnerability while maximizing response options. Under optimal conditions, it can neutralize an armed opponent in approximately 45 seconds. As she began demonstrating the fundamental principles of the technique her father had developed and Hayes had tried to erase, Sarah felt the weight of legacy and responsibility merge with professional purpose. The conspiracy had been neutralized, the traitors exposed, but the critical work remained ensuring America's operators received training that prioritized their survival, rather than creating predictable vulnerability. The 45-second disarmament technique that had neutralized Hayes would now protect those who risked everything defending their nation. Her father's methodology, preserved through Hammond's foresight and Sarah's dedication, would continue saving lives long after the conspiracy that nearly erased it had faded into classified history.